My name is Yolanda Lee. I'm the Global Director Talent at Kayak, and I'm also the Sloan Fellow 2013, and as one of this year's Symposium's volunteers. I would like to welcome you to this panel, Realizing Synergies from Digital Innovation. This is one of my favorite topics. So what is innovation? How to implement it? Is it realistic? What are the synergy? What is the ROI? I think you have a lot of questions, while you are working in your company. So it's my great privilege to introduce our panel moderator, Nils Fonstad. He is the expert in this area, and currently Nils is the research scientist of MIT Sloan Center for Information Systems Research. So Nils researched competitive digital innovation. Currently, he is studying how organizations successfully transform and develop capabilities necessary to compete with an expanding portfolio of digital innovation, from new products and enhanced process to complementary service and new business models. Nils is currently based in Madrid. He is responsible for both foster relations with organizations from Europe and Latin America, and conducting field-based research on how firms maximize business value and minimize risk from digitalization. Please welcome Nils.
Thank you. Thank you, Londa, and I want to thank my panelists and thank you for joining us. I've been studying the fact that a lot of organizations are spending more on digital innovation, but really struggling to manage what's essentially this growing portfolio of digital innovation that they're investing in. And actually, as a way to do some exercise right after lunch, how many of you, with a show of hands, how many of you would say that your organization, compared to 3 years ago, is spending more on digital innovation? Just a show of hands. Okay, cool. So everyone, now keep them up. This is the exercise part, so keep them up. Now, how many of you would say that of the amount that you're spending more on digital innovation, that you're spending more on a more diverse set of innovations? So 3 years ago, it may have been focused on operations, enhancing operations, and now it's that, but also customer-facing or new business models or employee experience. Okay, so we're spending more. Most of us are, practically all are spending more on digital innovation, and it's more diverse, right? It's a more diverse set of innovations. Okay, so still up. Now, how many of you would say your organization does a great job of tracking those investments in digital innovation? Oh, exercise part isn't over quite yet. Okay, well, now those of you who still have a hand up, how many would you say your organization does a great job of tracking the impact of those investments in digital innovation? Okay, well this experience is very, thank you, that's the exercise part, thank you. So your experience in this room is very representative of the firms that I've been speaking with. Most firms, if not all, are spending more on digital innovation. They're spending on a more diverse set of innovations, and yet many struggle to realize synergies across those. It's hard to track those investments. A very clear example of that is Deutsche Telekom. If you look at what Deutsche Telekom did in 2013, this is a good old traditional, big old company, German engineering, and they had to invest significantly more in digital innovation. But they were very concerned that their culture, that their organizational culture was too constraining for what they wanted to achieve, for the degree and radical level of innovation that they wanted to achieve. So they took a different approach from normal, and they invested in startups. They invested in agile. They set up a very cool set of hubs in Berlin, in the funkiest parts of Berlin, right? And so they were checking off the boxes of what it means to be a digitally innovative company. And then they let those teams go and innovate. And 2 years later, the executive committee said, okay, what happened to all the money that we've spent on digital innovation? Where did it go? And no one could answer that question. No one knew. So CEO left, a new CEO came along and said, well, let's at least learn from our approaches, our past approaches, and what didn't quite work with those approaches. Turns out they had invested in 64 areas of innovation, and they didn't even realize that. The innovation that came out from that was this digital book reader, which they quickly sold off. And they completely changed, based on the lessons that they learned from this kind of shotgun approach to digital innovation. They completely changed their approach to digital innovation. They took much more of a test and learn approach to digital innovation. And we've written up in a briefing 3 principles around which we see other organizations like Deutsche Telekom build test and learn capabilities. And that first principle is, it's not enough to simply have a compelling vision. You need to link that vision to a small set of innovation areas. And in the case of Deutsche Telekom, they ended up investing in 5 areas. So they focused all of this energy, all these people that wanted to engage in innovation, they focused them on 5 areas of innovation. And then the other aspect that they did is they found that their funding model, they wanted to make sure that any team within Deutsche Telekom could pursue an innovation at any time. They wanted experimentation to be ubiquitous, but one of the barriers for them to achieve that was their funding model. It was an annual process that relied on unrealistic business cases, and so they aggregated to that a venture capital inspired approach that said anyone who comes up with an idea at any time can propose that, can make a pitch for that, and they'll get and if it's a compelling pitch, they'll get the first round of funding. And if they produce customer-centric evidence, then they will get subsequent rounds of funding. This enabled them not only to foster experimentation throughout the organization at any time, but it also helped them stop innovation projects that weren't adding value. And they could reinvest any of the leftovers into projects that were producing value according to the end users that were involved in the process. And then finally, the third aspect, the third principle that companies are putting into practice in order to generate a test and learn approach is around ensuring that there's deeper engagement between all the stakeholders that have a stake in this outcome, both in the short term and in the long term. And that's part of the learning process. So in order to avoid this shotgun approach, which is so tempting, given that many of us are from organizational cultures that are so constraining, companies that are actually creating value from their portfolio of innovations, they're taking a test and learn approach. And what's great is the panelists that we have here have great experience in what it means to realize synergies across their portfolios of digital innovation. So I'm going to introduce each one, and I'm going to ask, as I introduce each of the panelists, to describe what digital innovation looks like today. Describe the richness of their portfolio. And I'll begin with Akash from McDermott. So if you could, Akash, if you could, first, thank you for joining us. Thank you all, the panelists, for joining. And what does digital innovation look like at McDermott?
So we started our journey. So McDermott focuses on onshore, offshore development. Combined, we have over 100 years of experience. So as an industry, we primarily focus on oil and gas, petrochemical plants. So 3 years ago, we started looking at what does digital mean for us? And we quickly realized that there is a digital thread that goes across various areas that we focused on. So the CIO for the business, Akash Khurana, who couldn't be here today, was also named as Chief Digital Officer. And he laid out this 3x2 strategy, focusing on 3 areas: digital yards, digital vessel, and digital products. These are digital platforms that we actually build for our customers. And we decided to have a 2-pronged approach: focus internally on productivity in our people, and focus externally on our customers, as well as how do we commercialize some of this. So for us, right now, that's the point of view we have, and we're focusing on those 3 areas in a distinct way.
Fantastic. And then we'll throughout the session talk about, how do you go about managing synergies across those areas, so that you're not simply investing in 4 or 5 different islands of innovation.
Right.
Great. And I should introduce you. I just forgot your title. Sorry. Chief Information Officer at Nordea, Alan Eddy. Thank you. Could you describe, particularly in your unit, specific unit at Nordea, what does digital innovation look like now?
Well, Nordea is, for those who don't know Nordea, we're the biggest bank in 4 Nordic countries. So Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and Finland. And the Nordics have a bit of an advantage to most other regions in that there's a lot of technical innovation going on there anyway. But also from a cultural standpoint, people are really starting to stop using physical cash. So really, the times you use money is getting rarer and rarer. And I think it's happening everywhere, but it's very advanced in the Nordics. In Norway, they're actively talking about getting rid of cash. So being digital is really quite natural, I think, for the bank. It's really something we have to do. It's not really an option. I mean, we have to be there with our customers and also with the countries that we work in. So that drive has been there for a while. Nordea has really embraced that and really innovating and spending a lot of money trying to get to a digital place. In the side of Nordea that I'm the CIO for, I represent capital markets, wholesale banking, wealth, asset management, and private banking. And really, the capital market side has always been pretty digital. You know, a lot of that is exchange feeds, it's electronic feeds. We've been there for quite some time. So this, we want to talk a little bit about later, is testing and learning. That's been part of our game for quite some time. But now we're doing that for my wealth customers, so private banking customers, how we increase the digital experience for them. We're using robotics now that we didn't do before to help people invest. So it's been a real driver for how our customers want to work, but also how we want to work with them. And well, I think we'll talk about this later, but I think there are some standouts. Some people still prefer paper. So we need to work on that as well.
That's key. That's key. Great. So David from Cochlear, CIO at Cochlear. How has your portfolio changed over the last 3 years?
Sure. Look, Cochlear is a Class 3 medical device company. It specialises in implantable hearing solutions, and its foundation has been on the design and manufacturing of that product. That has put the company in a very good market-leading position in terms of market share, but that's where the innovation, if you like, over the period of the prior 30 years has kind of stopped. And Cochlear has now realised, probably 3 years ago, that in order for it to maintain its competitive edge, it now needs to innovate around the customer and the customer journey. So the shift and the pivot for our organisation has been very much around, great, we've now got the manufacturing process right, we've now got the physical product, now iteratively getting better and better and better, but it's not a quantum. Where's the next level of innovation coming? And that is really around how does Cochlear become a frictionless company to do business with, either from a surgical or a professional or clinician perspective, right through to a patient or a parent perspective. So that's been the change of focus.
Great. And finally, Bill, if you could explain from your perspective, you have a broader perspective given your role. You look across multiple sectors, multiple types of companies. Yeah. Do you see them also dealing with a growing portfolio in terms of size and diversity?
The answer to that is absolutely yes. You know what it makes me think of is, as I was listening to the three of you talk, how many people here have seen the movie Moneyball? Anyone see that movie? By a show of hands? Sorry to use a movie and a sports analogy all in one, but the thing about the movie Moneyball, if you ever saw it, it's interesting because it's about innovation. It was really a new way to measure output of these players, of personnel performance. It wasn't really a new technology. It wasn't a new system. It was just a new way of thinking. And what I'm seeing at my clients is there's all these digital technologies and these ways to make business operations and life easier, and they're coming up on your portfolio. But then also there's this innovation. Who's in charge of innovation? You know, so what I'm seeing in this sort of portfolio is not only sort of the nuts and bolts projects that we think of, but also this idea of innovation. And the thing of it is when I look at my clients, it's like a jump ball of who's in charge of innovation at a client. Is it the COO, the CEO, the CFO, the CIO, the CMO? But the truth is they all look at the CIO as the person who's responsible, whether we like it or not. So even if your organization is dysfunctional, it's kind of our problem to fix in IT, whether we like it or not. Kind of like when a new hire doesn't have an employee, it could be a broken HR process, but somehow IT is going to get pointed at. So it's kind of like the same thing where now there's innovation, the portfolio is bigger, it's more diverse, and I think they're looking at the IT organization to help provide clarity in the organization around both innovation and digital.
Does that resonate with, I was going to say, does that resonate with the three of you?
Well, can I just say something?
Yeah.
I think that's the wonderful thing about being a CIO, right? Everyone in this room here, we get looked at as the source for innovation and inspiration, which I think is a marvelous thing and one of the best things about the job.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Right? But I like your Moneyball analogy as well, because it is metrics driven. So I guess, I mean, how do we use that analogy back in our world, yeah? How do we drive innovation through metrics?
Well, it was interesting because that, if you look at it, they didn't know what the ROI of that experiment would be. They didn't know. Is our team going to play better or not? You mean we're going to shift our entire baseball team to follow math? And so that was such a shift. So the ROI wasn't clear. So some ideas, the ROI isn't clear, and it makes people uncomfortable. And I feel like it's slowing down the velocity of innovation. Is this hesitancy? You know, I often think about, I obsess about Uber a lot, you know, because we all love it, right? And when I'm in a cab and I just think back to the technology they were investing in, that box and that thing and the meter, and, you know, how did they not have that innovation allowed into any one of those cab companies? Like, what was that problem? Again, so I think some of it is lack of ROI is tough sometimes with innovation.
I'm struck by the aspect that you mentioned, though, about who owns, or who's responsible for this growing portfolio. Again, both in size, but more important, this growing, increasingly diverse portfolio. Is that, because in many of the companies I look at, it's not obvious. I mean, and I know in your case, you've had experience where McDermott's creating new roles or taking the same role and expanding responsibilities. Can you describe a bit about the dynamics as digital innovation becomes more central? How does that influence the roles?
So typically, you know, if you look at oil and gas industry, right, as opposed to technology firms or banks, they've been laggards in terms of technology. But last 3 years, because of price pressures and some of the commercials, innovation is not necessary, it's oxygen. So as an organization, we've been looking at how do you innovate, how do you really make an impact to the productivity for the customers. So 3 years ago, as we started looking at this, we knew we had to create a focused organization, but not a siloed organization. Because everything you do has to revolve and go across the organization. So Akash as a CDO looks at what and why. As a CTO organization, we focus on execution and technology. How and how do you sustain it, right? And I see this as a normal cycle. You may start with something, and we call it minimal viable product approach. Build something fast, work with your business users, see if it works, pivot, but then you have to scale at some point. And once you scale, it becomes a mainstream technology. You start all over again. We talked about big data 3 years ago as something new. Right now, it sits in my enterprise technology.
How about at Cochlear?
Yeah, so at Cochlear, no one person owns innovation.
No one person.
No one person. It is everybody's responsibility to improve the product. It's everybody's responsibility to improve the service level and the customer experience. So it is not one single departmental role. It's not one single person role. That changes, however, when we get to a governance layer. And we get to a governance layer, and we have an investment committee. And that investment committee is myself, the CEO, and the CFO. And that party of three people hold the purse strings, and we'll decide what gets funded, what doesn't get funded. The tool, or one of the tools that we use around that is we have gone through an extensive process around mapping the customer journey for hearing loss. and where an investment makes sense because it's going to either remove a barrier or make the experience better, then we will invest in that. And it could be anything from an improvement in the physical product. So our implants are now part of the Internet of Things. They're now all connected. So it could be something in relation to that, or it could be innovation within our call centre. Because ironically, if you've got hearing loss and your device stops working, 3 years ago, the only way to contact us was through the telephone. And that's pretty illustrative of what I said earlier on, whereas up till 3 years ago, the focus of the organisation was on the physical product. It wasn't on the experience. So now we have a multi-channel methodology in which you can contact the organisation for assistance. And that's the pivot.
And what's striking is that becomes then the center of gravity around which you manage the portfolio. Bill, you had when we were talking in preparation for this, you had a nice you had this nice phrase around the role of leadership providing this center of gravity. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Because innovation is very much distributed, to your point, everybody is sort of responsible in a way. Somebody's got to create, I call it this like gravitational pull, this innovation gravity. And I find that my clients who seem to be doing the best with innovation, there's somebody who's famous there. Maybe typically it's been the CIO. In fact, I've seen a lot of CIOs become the CIO/Chief Innovation Officer, but they're getting the company excited. Some of the best ones I've seen, they're kind of like this chief excitement officer in a way around digital. And not only are they getting the company all juiced up about some of this stuff, they're also parlaying it into marketing. Because getting the word out to your customers that you're working on some of this stuff in any industry is kind of cool to know we're innovating as a company for the future. I think today customers can see the future more clearly than ever, like just better innovations. And so I think, again, people, when I see it working, it's somebody who's getting the company excited, parlaying it into marketing, that fuels the investment, and it seems to get a little bit of a critical mass. But there's somebody who's creating a gravitational pull. Maybe it's not centralized, and there's somebody named, but somebody's out there, grabbing that flag, running with it.
I think this is so key because in talking with the panelists here, but also in talking with other chief information officers, my colleague Joe Peppard and I, one of the things that really stands out for top performing CIOs is they're no longer infatuated or completely focused on the business IT aspect, business IT alignment. That to them is an alignment trap. Instead, they're focused on helping their organization co-evolve with customers and with partners. So avoiding the IT alignment trap and instead focusing all of their efforts on building capabilities to co-evolve with customers and with partners. And that really stood out as well talking to all four of you, that the center of gravity, that's the role of senior management is to really provide that. And by the way, it happens to be around partners and customers, right? It's not this internal focused, completely out of touch with customers. And so maybe if you could talk a bit about how you go about ensuring that at McDermott that this alignment is actually about co-evolving with partners and with customers.
Sure. So when we started this journey, we basically knew we had to think differently. So we introduced the organization to elements of design thinking, open thinking, and platform thinking. We started out initially with ideation sessions with the subject matter experts, the folks in the yards, on our vessels. We actually even had ideation sessions with some of our customers. And what we found is the demand was much greater than we originally anticipated. At that point, we knew we had to deliver differently. You cannot take your typical month cycle. So we focused on having an innovation center staffed with product developers, the mindset of developing a product as opposed to an IT system. And they work directly with some of our operational experts, our SMEs, to build a product, see if it works. If it doesn't, pivot. And I tell them, guys, it's okay to fail, just fail fast.
I think that's key. How about at Nordea? How are you going about ensuring that there's a richer understanding of customers and partners. I mean, they all play an increasingly critical role in the kinds of solutions and offerings you're developing. And it's quite diverse, I must say, the range of customers that you described. It's not homogeneous.
No, I think that's, yeah, our clients are no means homogeneous. We have large corporates and we have individuals just like us. I think partnering is super critical. You've got to pay attention to what's going on in the market. We've developed this little AI robot for our investors, people like us who just want to talk to someone and get some simple investment advice. And that was something that we couldn't have done 3 years ago. And just innovating with talking to clients and partners who can help us. So we developed this robot who understands Finnish. And funnily enough, it also understands Norwegian, which is pretty weird. But that was good, right? So now we use this little robot for investment advice. We also use it now for internal advice on how we navigate HR processes in the bank. So we're trying to just leverage these little things all the time. So that's one aspect, just paying attention to the market, what's happening, what we can do. But also listening to our clients. Our clients pull us, and we try and push them a little bit as well, and try and get to the right model. Some of our clients are more careful. They quite like their paper statements. They quite like their letter they get every month saying, here's what my bank balance is, and here's what my investments are worth. And then some clients saying, can you stop sending me paper and let me see this online? So we have to listen.
Yeah.
So Nile, I want to know, when can we have this robot on the panel?
Yeah, exactly.
Pardon me?
When can we have this robot to the panel?
And, well, if you understand Finnish or Norwegian, yeah.
How about at Cochlear with especially you mentioned already the journey, and really that's the center of gravity. But obviously you're partnering a lot in order to offer your customers a broader, more comprehensive solution that's beyond just the product.
Yeah, correct. And innovation development at Cochlear it sort of has two evolutionary paths. One around the product, and we have a very defined 9-step process to commercialization of product. And then the other is around, I call it the everything else, okay? So everything the product touches. But with the latter in particular, which is where I'm involved the most, we will go out and partner with clinics. A recent example would be around artificial intelligence. For those of you that don't know much about hearing loss or cochlear implants, but when you get a cochlear implant, you don't hear like you and I do now. You hear initially it sounds like bells and whistles, but you have to retrain the brain on how to hear. So that process can take years. So what we're doing with artificial intelligence is we have a number of maps. We have millions and millions of maps, and the map is effectively a graphic equalizer. So it controls the pitch and bass of every frequency on the cochlear implant, and we can now expedite the amount of time that it takes to you as a recipient of the implant to get to your optimal map. So all of that innovation has come around just through the deployment of technology, and we'll do that because the audiologist is somewhat threatened by that, because their bread and butter is very much around the mapping of the patient and the post-surgical care. So we've been very careful to partner with the audiology practices, particularly here in the US and in Europe, around what that might look like, and then come up with recommended maps, whereas the audiology practice then still has the sign-off on the map. But we can take months and months out of that rehabilitation process through that. But it's only done through partnership. If we didn't do it through partnership, it would just get rejected.
That's a great example. Really interesting. I'm looking at the questions that some of you are sending in, so thank you. Please continue to do that. One of the questions is around security and innovation, and you all are from sectors that are very, very concerned about security and safety, heavily regulated. Does being more innovative mean you have to learn to sacrifice a little about security? Or how do you handle that aspect of innovation? We'll start with you at McDermott.
I would say absolutely not. When we look at edge and edge devices, we start with making sure they're secure, and we put protocols in place. Safety also. In our industry, if you look at oil and gas, there's some harshest environment our folks work on. McDermott, one of our key values is safety. We just celebrated 85 million hours LTI free. That means for that long, nobody to take time off. And I'll just take a little bit longer to give you a personal experience I had. I was in our Mexico yard and I was talking to a few workers, and I asked him, I said, what is it about McDermott you like that you come to work for? Is it we pay more, better working environment? What is it? And I would never forget what the guy told me. He says, when I come to McDermott in the morning, my wife knows I'll come back home. Right? And that touched me. Technology is good to improve operations, but you have to touch human beings, improve safety. And for McDermott, that's one of the things we look at. Everything we do, we look at synergies, not just operational, but what does it do for our employees? How does it impact our customers? So security, safety, very important, but you don't have to compromise any of it.
And at Nordea, how does this affect your approach to this growing portfolio of innovation?
Well, you have to embrace it, right? It's something our customers expect, deserve. It's what our regulators expect, right? So we have to embrace it and just build it into our processes. And I just think it's partly education. It's partly process, it's partly technology. It's things like good coding practices, right, for cyber. But it's something, it isn't going away. It's something we should embrace and make it part of your process.
David, in your experience?
I'm going to echo that.
Yeah.
3 years ago, our information security function was 2 people. Today, it's 10. Yeah. But that's a factor of moving the product into the Internet of Things and the amount of data that generates. And we're dealing with a Class 3 medical device, so it's a very heavily regulated environment. You have to prove to the FDA that you're not going to do any harm, and there's a fairly rigorous process that we need to go through for that. So it is part of the DNA strain now of the organisation.
Yeah. And Bill, as you look across different sectors and the different clients, how do they handle this aspect of digital innovation?
I find at first a lot of organizations they're worried about, obviously everybody's worried about enterprise risk. By the way, I think every one of my clients has had a security incident, by the way. I always say incident when I've been told, but every single one of them has had some issue happen of some kind. So it's not a zero defect business. But the truth is, I think these systems are helping to put better controls in place. You know, everyone seemed okay with Access and Microsoft Excel flying around, all over the place in the back office operations, but now we're moving to more systems. And are they in the cloud? Sure. So do they need to be a good vendor? So I think, to your point, it's beefier IT staffs around security. It's more vendor diligence around, are they legitimate? And then third, it's just understanding that internal control environment, because a lot of times I find the controls are actually a lot improved. Now, if you're the NRA or ACLU, do you want to put your data in the cloud? Maybe not. So I think the industry clearly depends on a few things. But, but again, you need to be aggressive with some of this stuff, but also cautious and live within the regulatory world, right? I think we just had the European regulations hit over here in the US with GDPR. So there's a lot of things to consider in the regulatory environment. But you got to keep moving forward. And a lot of times I think it ultimately results in a more stronger internal control environment.
Got another question that I wanted to offer you folks. In your experience, is it more effective to focus digital innovation around a business objective, such as customer experience, or around technology or capabilities, such as mobile, omni-channel? Pros and cons. How do you describe your innovation portfolio to others?
So the way we look at innovation and digital portfolio is having a digital thread that ties all those things together. It's not just about customers or about internal productivity or really about technology. You have to build an organization model where there's an invisible digital thread that goes across all of them. I'll give you an example. We started out with digitizing our vessels. We use vessels for commissioning work, installation work, but very soon we found out a lot of the technology we're deploying, they're very applicable in the yard. And as we started working, capturing some of the spool data, we had a drone that basically went across the yard to locate some spools. We were quickly able to translate some of those data directly into a digital twin product that our customers get. So I don't think it's a siloed approach, it's one or the other. You have to look at all of them and see how you tie them together, connect the dots together.
And what I hear you saying, as you described earlier also, you've got some clear business objectives, but underneath threading, as you say, threading those together are some common technologies possibly.
Right.
But that really the key thing that people see are what objectives are we accomplishing with this? So that's interesting. How about at Nordea? How do you approach the
Well, I think the two are almost symbiotic, right? You've got to drive things from your clients. Sometimes cool ideas on new technologies, like this robot I talked about, inspires good ideas for your clients. So I think you have to, as I said at the start, CIOs are in a really cool position because we can help our companies innovate. We have some cool ideas. But I think you have to listen to both sides, the client and the technology. For instance, in private banking right now, we've developed this new capability, which allows our clients to help balance their portfolio in a better way. And that stuff wasn't available. We couldn't do that a few years ago. But now we have these people with tablets like the one you've got in your hand there, who could walk into clients and say, here's your portfolio, and da-da-da, right? So the two things are linked.
Interesting.
Business outcome first, technology second. And our weighting's probably around 80-20. So very much focused around what we're trying to achieve. And that's where we'll put the money. But yet we will always allow for a sandpit environment. So we have certain clinics that we do business with where we have experiments running. But it's really kind of that 80-20 rule. And an example around that is with our latest implant, we are now collecting an enormous amount of data. At this stage, we have absolutely, I'm not going to say no idea, we have a few ideas, but we don't have a clear articulated plan around what we're going to do with that data or how that data can be applied. But not capturing that data now is a crime. So we'll capture it, we'll store it, and then we'll work out what to do with it. So that's kind of on the 20% side.
Bill, do you want to add any?
Yeah, I mean, I loved hearing a couple of the comments. I think it is a crime, by the way. I agree, you always capture the data. But I think it's interesting, too, that technology does inspire. Like, I think a speech recognition technology, I'm seeing that generate a lot of ideas at my clients, especially in healthcare or a lot of jobs where you're sort of hands-on and you'd have to stop to enter that data. So, you know, again, I think it's spawning all these ideas. Obviously, I always want to say the business comes first because it's like in my shareholder DNA. But, you know, I also feel like millennials are a crucial part of this whole equation. I know it sounds a little strange, but I find young people today just have a lot of ideas and just think different. I couldn't help thinking when I was listening to you guys talk just about my son when he was younger. We opened his first bank account. I remember we were both in the same bank. He opened his own account. And like he couldn't understand why he couldn't just transfer money on the app from one another. Like he didn't get it. He's like, so you can write a check, take a picture, and I can't just like, you know, I need a route. Like he's so confused. And I'm like, you know, he saw that frictionless future. He could see that was there. You know, it was real interesting too because I was at another event and I saw the CEO when I mentioned about Millennials Get Up. He said, you know, you're so right. We make auto safety equipment, steering wheels, dashboard materials, airbags. And our airbags are super smart today. They weigh you. They know how far away from the dashboard. In fact, there's 9 mini explosions that are handled by a computer to determine, so, you know, least impact. He said, so we were in a business meeting, you know, in a leadership meeting, you know, how can we innovate? What's a new business model, new revenue? some intern happens to be in there delivering something like food, no less, right? And he's like, this kid's listening, this young kid, and the kid speaks up. He goes, hey, can I just throw something out there? And I'm like, yeah, what's up? They're like, well, you know those little side airbags you guys make that go in the side doors and those panels? He goes, you know, my grandfather's fallen like 4 times and had broken hips. Like, can't you put one of those in a belt? And they were all like, holy shit, maybe we're not in the auto safety business anymore, you know? And he said, now it's a $40 million, granted small, but you know, a year later, a $40 million business unit, and now they have a whole health, you know, med device, and they're in that sort of, they're in multiple industries. And again, it was just having the idea, you know, so technology sometimes, but ideas are critical, however they're.
Those are great examples. Do you guys do formal efforts at trying to inspire others in the organization about technology, like open houses or anything like that? Any formal efforts that you do in your organizations that
So
you can
we
highlight?
did. So initially, about 2 years ago, we did a big road show
A roadshow, okay.
where we brought in a lot of vendors at each of our sites, and then just really show them the art of the possible. Bring in our business, even some customers, and say, this is what's available out there, right? But to his point, I think the new generation, and even just our regular employees, they use some of this technology in day-to-day life. Example, in our Dubai yard, it gets very hot. There are times of the month that we don't have any work in the afternoon. But today, everybody wears wearables. So one of the things we're doing there is having workers wear wearable devices that can track the body temperature, if they're going in areas where it's not safe. But these are things that are in daily life, right? So, but as we show our employees, we see a lot of demand that came through it. When they see what's possible, they see the technology. So you gotta be an evangelist.
And is that true also with customers and partners, or right now those efforts are focused on internal employees?
It's true with customers, definitely. A lot of our partners, we normally drive them, but our customers are asking for a lot of innovation in our digital twin space, for example. Right. Recently, we won a few awards because customers are saying, look, we like this technology. Right? And we're very bullish on digital, we're very bullish on technology. McDermott is taking the lead when it comes to innovation in oil and gas. Now, customers are noticing that.
How about at Nordea? How do you go about fostering and inspiring?
Yeah, there's a couple of things we do. One is we do a hackathon every year, and until this year, it was always IT, just a bunch of IT people hacking something together for 2 days, drinking lots of Red Bull and presenting. But this year we invited anyone from the bank, anyone at all, and we had this huge participation. There were still lots of people drinking lots of Red Bull, being very inspired and getting very excited, and it was great. So we had that. It helped really foster that work. And then the winner, the two first and second prize, they went on to another thing in Nordea, which we call Project Runway, which I think is inspired by something else. But it was another innovation thing where good ideas, we were given a couple of weeks to come up with an idea, and we would fund them and so on. It was just a great way to innovate.
We have every year an event for sponsors in Europe, and Nordea this year in March hosted that event, and we got to meet some of the finalists of Project Runway and the ideas that employees were developing and coming up with, and they were being given funds and time to develop these were outstanding. We were blown away, and so I was privileged enough to see some of the fruits of that.
Yeah, the trick is we give these guys 2 days or 5 days to do something. Why can't we just keep this going for a whole year, right? We burned out, I guess.
And at Cochlear, how are you inspiring? What helps?
Very similar. So we have an annual hackathon, but we've only had the first one last year.
Okay.
So I think from our perspective, we have a journey to go on in relation to that, but very similar concept. Two winners, and then their projects will get funded.
Cool.
I wanted to highlight about the question about how do we go about framing our portfolio? Do we focus on business objectives? Some of the research that I've done on digital innovation portfolios and what distinguishes top performing firms from others in terms of how much they spend on digital innovation and how they allocate that spend on digital innovation. My research finds that actually what distinguishes what distinguishes top performers is not how much they spend. And this is when you control for industry, you control for a whole variety of factors. Spending more on digital innovation is not a differentiator. It is actually how they allocate that total spend across 4 types of digital innovation. And I'll just show you real quick those 4 types, because 2 of those are internally focused, and 2 of those are externally focused. And it depends really on, and so here you see in blue the internally focused, so innovations that seek to improve business operations and innovations that seek to improve the employee experience, where we're talking about ensuring that employees can work across functions, can test and learn, can draw on data around products, around process, around customers. They need all those tools, right? And they need processes, and that's what constitutes the employee experience. Then we see the red, right? The external facing, which are customer facing innovations that are going to help us generate more revenue per product and more revenue per customer, and then new business models. So generating completely new types of revenue from new types of customers. And when you look at top performers, what you see here is the average portfolio. And you can, I recommend if you haven't, estimate your own company's digital innovation portfolio according to these 4. And your organization may not invest in all 4, for example. But then the next question is, once you estimate your portfolio, so what? How do you know if your portfolio is the right portfolio given where you are and where you want to be in 3 years? How do you know? And that's part of the test and learn that we see. And when you look at top performers, statistically, you see that top performers, this is an example of top performers with regards to customer satisfaction. So these are firms that are in the top 25% with regards to things like Net Promoter Score, right? And this is the average portfolio of those top 25%. And what's striking is that it's balanced between the blue and the red, between the internal facing capabilities and the external facing capabilities. And we see this constantly over and over again. We've done this for other business outcomes like revenue growth, business operations. And top performers consistently invest in all 4 types, and none of them are pure plays. None of them are investing in any one type. They are figuring out what's the right balance for them. And here you'll see that a quarter of the innovation portfolio on average is on the employee experience, right? So 2 sides of the same coin. Those that are high on Net Promoter Score tend to also be very high on employee experience. And this is in a briefing that you all can have access to. But the point is, how do you go about figuring out what's the right balance for you folks, right? That seems to be a fundamental part of the test and learn journey is figuring out that balance. You know, when are you too internally focused, or what I see also is too externally focused, right? In our rush to increase our Net Promoter Score, we end up spending much too high of a percentage on the external facing, at the risk of simply, creating even more operational spaghetti and making it very difficult for our employees to get through that organizational chaos and innovate on the external facing. So what's helped you guys, on your experience, manage this balance between building both kinds of capabilities?
Right. So what we found is there's not one good answer, right? You gotta have your objectives. Your business objectives have to be firm. But how you go about achieving those has to be fluid. And that's why I call it a digital thread.
A digital thread.
Because you don't have a straight answer, it's not firm. And as you experiment, as you build minimal viable products, you learn more about it. And you have to pivot.
It's funny because at Deutsche Telekom, the example I gave you with the 5 that they focused on, the 5 areas, they assume that those 5 areas will change every year based on what they've learned from all the innovations that constitute those 5 areas. They assume that, hey, once we get evidence throughout the year, we'll adapt those 5 into 5 that are going to be hopefully even more productive given our objectives. How about at Nordea?
Yeah, I agree. What you just said, because I think we've all been in the position where we're saying we're going to chase revenue, we're going to build things for our client, then we do it. Then, oh, you're too expensive. Figure out how we get cheaper, and then we did, So we do the zigzagging all the time, right? And I think that's inevitably a challenge. So we need to get the balance right just by taking a good oversight. And I think how we budget projects is crucial to that. I think the days of funding a €100 million budget over 5 years are gone, right? Because there's no visibility, there's no guarantees you're going to get. And by the way, the world will change 25 times. So I think shorter development cycles, shorter budget cycles are better.
Yeah. And have you succeeded in introducing those shorter?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I think we do have a quarterly budget cycle now with drawdowns and things. But clearly, some projects, you can never do a project in 3 months, right? Sure. So inevitably, they will span a year, 2 years, whatever.
How about at Cochlear? What's helping you kind of figure out what's the right balance?
Honesty moment. We don't have a process around that.
Yeah.
I look across your 5, and I think it's pure luck, but we are pretty balanced across the 5.
Yeah.
But it's happened organically rather than deliberately.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think the risk is when you don't worry about the synergies across, then you end up, for example, creating a horrible customer experience. But if you're anchoring all these innovation efforts around a clear customer journey, I think by default, you have to worry about whether you have the right balance, right? So I think that anchoring that you introduced is the way you actually help avoid creating these silos that don't complement each other.
Yeah, we do have that mapped. So, the entire journey mapped.
How long did it take to create that?
About 9 months.
Yeah. And then I assume that evolves also. That's not a fixed map.
No, it's pretty static.
It is.
It is. Where it varies is from market to market. So you've got developed markets, because the healthcare system is a major influencer on a patient's journey.
Right.
So if you are operating in a developed market with good social healthcare, then you have path A. If you're a pediatric, then in a developed market with good social healthcare, it's going to be funded and you're going to get a cochlear implant. It's the standard of care. But if you're in an undeveloped market and you're an adult and you have severe to profound hearing loss, it is not necessarily funded, and the maturity of the healthcare system isn't going to help you. So that's where you do get variation.
Bill?
I guess when we look out there for the balance, besides Red Bull, which is also very helpful, I think that some of that balance is, we think about an employee experience and a customer experience, but what about the organization's experience? What do I mean by that? Well, it's all about the data, right? I think we tend to focus on employee and customer because they're people, and we want them to have a good experience, right? And we put in these systems, CRM and all this stuff, right? Mobile apps. But then if we don't think about what we're learning from the customers and the data and the analytics and not getting to predictive analytics, you can create ultimately digital frustration, and operations can lag behind. So you're setting this expectation with these experiences that you can't deliver on because you focused on edge systems and employees and people systems versus the nuts and bolts and the data flow diagram. And I think predictive analytics, I saw the CEO of weather.com talk, and it was really neat just to listen to them. And he said, we're getting a little better every year predicting the weather. Not a lot, but a little bit. We mapped the whole globe, and now we've realized we have to map 3 dimensions. We put devices on airplanes. But collecting that data, every year we should get a little better. And I think businesses every year should get a little better, in that same way. So I think that experience matters, and the best people, I think, naturally balance it over time, because you can't let any one of those get too far out of whack. Otherwise, you're setting missed expectations for someone, either an employee, a customer, or delivering to those people.
Data is a fundamental aspect for all these types of innovation, and I know at Cochlear you've invested significantly in ensuring data is available for a whole variety of digital innovations, not simply the operational. Can you, and we've written a research briefing. One of my colleagues, Barb Wixom, has co-authored a research briefing on what David and his colleagues have done at Cochlear with data. to foster this whole diverse portfolio of innovation that they engage in there. Can you give us some highlights of that experience? Because that's a fundamental piece of this, as Bill highlighted.
Yeah, I'll touch on a couple of things. So we have a saying at Cochlear, there's the love, and then there's the money. And the money follows the love. So the experience of a patient through their hearing journey, it's particularly difficult if you're a parent that's had a child that's suffered hearing loss or born deaf. And the only thing that you want for that child is the best possible experience in life, and create you want that child to have every opportunity. So one of the things that we've done with data in that particular regard is, and again through partnership, is look at the hearing index. And it could be something as simple as word recognition. So based on how long your child has had a cochlear implant and your child's age, where should your child be in speech recognition and use of words? So we measure that, we monitor that, and then we play that back to the parent. So that's an example of how we've captured data and then reapplied that data to give a level of comfort to a carer.
That's great. We are wrapping up. I just noticed the time. So I think we can just get a final word from you folks of advice based on your experiences. Any points that we didn't quite get to that you want to highlight before we wrap up? Based on your experience at McDermott, what would you highlight as really what's helped you most manage this increasingly diverse portfolio? What would you highlight?
So key for us has been just changing the mindset.
Changing the mind
Internally. You have to think like born digital.
Yeah.
And McDermott, we're very fortunate, even though I call ourselves 90-plus-year-old startup, because our organization lives on innovation. But you have to help them push the envelope. What was not possible yesterday is possible today, because technology is moving very, very fast. So we constantly look at some of the business challenges and say, how can we apply technology? Not just in a silo, but with the organization. And you continue to do that, hire the right talent, and let them just lose.
That's great. How about at Nordea? What would you highlight?
Well, I would just say something to watch out for is that there's no shortage of good ideas.
There's no shortage of good ideas.
There's no shortage of good ideas. And the problem is, how do you make sure that you focus down on the right ones?
Yeah, that's right.
And how do you make sure you're doing those things consistently? And it comes down to communication, right? So the simple things in life are the ones you need to focus on, because we often forget that.
Thank you.
My one would be careful on how much you take on. Otherwise, you'll end up doing bespoke innovation and it won't tie together.
Yeah.
So be selective, but be brave and do it.
Yeah. Bill?
I would steal a couple words from you, maybe love first, right? Love what you do. And I think you are in this position, this exciting time in the history of man, in this leadership role where you can change how your organization operates. You can eliminate, I think, some of the confusion around innovation. Do be careful about taking on too much, but don't fall behind at the same time, and the money will follow.
Can you please join me in thanking these panelists for their insights? Thank you.